Why does silence feel more dangerous than gunfire? Christmas Eve was supposed to be quiet, uneventful, maybe even peaceful, but Lieutenant Commander Derek Brennan knew better than to trust silence, especially this kind. The kind that wraps around your throat and squeezes until you can't breathe. He crouched behind a frozen berm, breath fogging the edges of his night vision goggles, watching a valley that should have been alive with movement, patrols, sentries, something. But there was nothing. Just snow falling in thick curtains and wind cutting through their gear like exposed wire. 12 degrees. Wind chill making it feel like zero. Behind him, 200 Navy SEALs from 3 separate teams waited in defensive positions, watching the tree line with the kind of focus that only comes from years of staying alive in places designed to kill you. The operation had been textbook perfect. Strike the compound, secure the target, extract before dawn. They'd done it countless times. Except tonight, the target never showed. And now the forest felt wrong in ways Brennan couldn't articulate but absolutely trusted. Petty Officer Marcus Webb moved in close, jaw tight, voice low. "Sir, drone feeds are degrading. Snow's too heavy." Brennan checked his tactical display. The extraction zone sat 3 kilometers northeast, across exposed ground and a frozen marsh. Birds were inbound but wouldn't risk touching down until the landing zone was clear. Standard procedure. Except nothing about tonight felt standard. "How long until we're blind?" Brennan asked. 10 minutes, maybe less." That's when the first shots came, not from one direction, from everywhere at once. Muzzle flashes erupting from positions thermal imaging had marked empty just seconds earlier. Snow burst around Brennan's position. Webb went down hard, clutching his leg, swearing through gritted teeth. Return fire tore through the tree line, but the enemy had depth, numbers, patience. "Contact on all sides," someone shouted over the net. They knew we were coming. Brennan's thoughts came in fragments as he moved, fighters buried deep, gear cold-soaked to defeat thermal scopes, snow masking movement. They had walked straight into a kill box built specifically for this moment, for them. All teams fall back to Rally Point Delta. Operators moved in controlled chaos, covering sectors, hauling wounded, fighting every meter. But the enemy already had them dialed in. Every step toward the rally point drew heavier fire. Brennan watched Petty Officer James Kellerman take 3 rounds center mass, 2 stopped by plates. The third slipped through the shoulder gap, spinning him sideways into the snow. The radio erupted with voices layered over voices. "Bravo taking casualties. Need corpsmen. Charlie 3 is down. I repeat, Charlie 3 is down. Can't reach the rally point. Too much fire." Brennan pressed into a fallen log, forcing calm into his voice even as his heart hammered. "All stations, this is actual. Hold where you are. We dig in and wait for air." His radio operator's voice came back flat. "Sir, air support is 40 minutes out. Weather's grounding everything at base. 40 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. It might as well have been. SEALs scraped together hasty fighting positions, snow concealing them but also betraying them. Every movement left tracks. Every breath showed white in the freezing air. The enemy knew exactly where they were. Webb crawled beside Brennan, tourniquet cinched tight around his thigh, face pale but steady. "Sir, we're not making it to Christmas." Brennan said nothing, because Webb was probably right. What do you say when there's nothing left to say? The command net turned into a ledger of desperation. Voices clipped, professional, hiding the fear underneath. "Actual, this is Delta 2. 3 urgent surgical, 2 routine. Corpsman's working, but we need medevac now." "Delta 2, no medevac available. Weather's too heavy, hold position and treat in place." Silence followed. Then a quiet copy. But it wasn't acknowledgement, it was acceptance. Everyone understood, even if no one said it out loud. They were on their own. Lieutenant Rachel Cortez moved through the wounded with hands that had stopped shaking years ago. Blood steamed in the frozen air as she worked. 4 critical casualties. Supplies meant for 2. She did the math and kept working anyway. "Talk to me, LT." The voice belonged to Petty Officer Daniel Foster, 19 years old, first combat deployment. Shrapnel had torn open his abdomen, and even through her training, Cortez knew it was bad. She packed the wound, held pressure, knowing it wouldn't be enough. "You're going to be okay," she lied, because that was the job. Foster's eyes searched her face, desperate for something to hold on to. "My wife's pregnant, due in February. We were going to find out the gender when I got back." Cortez pulled the bandage tighter, her hands calm even as her throat tightened. "You'll be there, I promise." She hadn't promised. You never promised. A few positions away, Chief Petty Officer Thomas Wade tracked ammunition levels on a notepad, numbers written in cramped handwriting that betrayed nothing of what they meant. The numbers were ugly, dropping fast. Every team had burned through rounds hard during the initial ambush. Resupply wasn't coming. At their current burn rate, they'd be empty in 90 minutes. Actual, be advised. We're at 40% on small arms, requesting resupply. Negative on resupply. Conserve ammo. Controlled bursts only. Wade knew exactly what that translated to. When the bullets were gone, it would be knives and bare hands, and after that, nothing. The radio crackled again, a different voice this time, younger, strained. "Actual, this is Echo 4, taking heavy fire from the North Ridge. Request permission to fall back." Brennan closed his eyes for half a second. "Negative, Echo 4, if you fall back, you expose Bravo's flank. Hold your position." "Sir, we're getting cut apart up here." "Hold your position." A pause, then quieter. "Understood." Command had trained Brennan how to issue orders that got people killed. It had never taught him how to carry them afterward. His radio operator, Petty Officer First Class Vincent Hayes, kept his tone level, professional. "Sir, there's one asset still operating in the area. Long-range recon. She's been monitoring our net." "She?" "Yes, sir." "How long since contact?" "She hasn't transmitted, just listening." Brennan waited. A lone operator nearby meant either catastrophic luck or remarkable foresight. "Can she assist?" Hayes hesitated. "Above my pay grade, sir." Which meant possibly, but at a price Command wouldn't like. Before Brennan could respond, flares ignited overhead, washing the forest in harsh orange light. A voice followed over loudspeakers, accented but clear, calm, almost friendly. "American soldiers, you celebrate Christmas tonight. You are far from home, far from family. And you will die in the snow like dogs." A few SEALs shifted, anger flashing across their faces, but Brennan stilled them with a raised hand. "Psychological warfare only worked if you let it. We know you have wounded, we know you have no air support, we know your ammunition is nearly gone. Lay down your weapons, we will care for your injured, you will see your families again." No one moved, because everyone understood that promise was as hollow as Cortez's earlier lie to Foster. "Very well. Then you will die tonight, on your Christmas." The flares burned out. Darkness rushed back in, colder somehow, followed immediately by a probing assault from the east. Bravo met it with controlled fire, but Brennan heard the change immediately. Slower cadence, longer gaps between shots. They were rationing rounds. "Bravo status. We held them, lost 2 more, down to 18% ammo." 18%. The eastern push had been a test. The enemy was measuring reaction time, fire discipline, finding weaknesses. They would strike again where it hurt most. "All teams prepare for coordinated assault, expect heavy contact." It came 15 minutes later, not from one axis but 4 at once. The enemy had manpower, patience, and time, everything the SEALs didn't. Echo's position broke first. "This is Echo 2. Echo 4 is gone, whole team, we're pulling back." Echo 2, negative. "Hold your—" The transmission dissolved into static and screaming. When it cleared, Echo 2 was silent, permanently. Can one person change the outcome of an entire battle? 40 kilometers north, Captain Elaine Mercer lay prone in the ruins of a cell tower, watching through her scope as men died in the valley below. She'd been monitoring the SEAL frequency for 2 hours, listening to the situation deteriorate from bad to catastrophic. Her mission had nothing to do with them. She was deep cover reconnaissance, tracking arms shipments through the region. 6 months of work building a profile on a weapons network that stretched across 3 countries. Her orders were explicit. Observe only. Do not compromise position. Do not engage. Radio silence unless emergency extraction required. But orders didn't account for 200 men bleeding out in the snow on Christmas Eve. Mercer adjusted her scope, calculating wind, temperature, barometric pressure. The target she'd identified sat 2,847 meters away, nearly 2 miles. The enemy commander directing the assault from a fortified position on the western ridge. From her vantage point, she could see him clearly, confident, unhurried, moving between positions, coordinating fire teams with practiced efficiency. He was good, experienced, the kind of commander who didn't make mistakes. She watched him gesture to subordinates, issuing orders that sent more fighters streaming toward the SEAL positions. Watched him check his watch, probably calculating how long until the Americans ran out of ammunition. He thought he'd won. Maybe he had. Her radio activated. Colonel Novik's voice, cold and precise. Ghost 7 status report. Mercer keyed the mic twice. Listening, acknowledge. Understood, you are to maintain observation only. Do not, I repeat, do not compromise your position. Those SEALs are not your concern. We have bigger priorities. She keyed the mic once. Understood. Then she turned off the radio. Some decisions you make alone. Mercer chambered around, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle settle against her shoulder. The scope crosshairs found the enemy commander's chest. Center mass, textbook, but center mass wasn't the shot. She needed to send a message. Needed to create chaos, not just eliminate a target. She shifted slightly, finding the communications officer standing beside the commander. Younger man, holding a radio, coordinating between units. If she could take him out first, disrupt their coordination, maybe buy the SEALs a few minutes. Her finger rested on the trigger, not pulling. Just present, feeling the mechanism. In the valley below, she heard Brennan's voice over the net, calm, steady, the kind of calm that came from accepting the inevitable. All teams, this is actual. If we don't make it out, it's been an honor. The responses came back one by one, professional, tight. Men preparing to die well. Foster's voice, weaker now, asking Cortez to tell his wife he loved her. Webb directing his team to redistribute the last of their ammunition. Wade calculating how many rounds per man they had left. 14. Mercer exhaled slowly, steadying her breathing. 2,847 meters, nearly impossible conditions, falling snow, wind gusting at 15 to 20 miles per hour, temperature affecting bullet trajectory. One shot, that's all she'd get. After that, counterfire would force her to relocate or die. The enemy commander gestured again, and more fighters moved forward. Mercer could see the SEAL positions being overrun in slow motion. Echo was gone. Bravo was down to a handful of operators. Charlie was holding by sheer will and dwindling ammunition. She thought about her career. 6 months of intelligence work, relationships built, networks mapped. All of it compromised the moment she pulled the trigger. She thought about the court-martial waiting for her, disobeying direct orders, compromising operational security, career over, possibly prison. Then she thought about Foster's pregnant wife, about Brennan's calm acceptance of death, about 200 men who'd volunteered to serve and were about to die because she followed orders. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Target acquired, she whispered into the radio net, knowing every frequency was monitoring. Nobody asked who she was. Nobody questioned the range, because the shot she was setting up was one no one else would even attempt. What happens when you take a shot that defies every rule of physics? The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Mercer's entire existence compressed into the space between trigger and target. She'd made long-range shots before, 1,200 meters, 1,500, even once at 1,900 in near-perfect conditions. But this was different. This was physics and mathematics and prayer wrapped into one moment that would either save lives or accomplish nothing. She adjusted for wind, leading the target by 4 feet. Adjusted for bullet drop, aiming 2 feet above the communications officer's head. Adjusted for the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself subtly pulling the bullet off course at this range. Her breathing slowed, in, out, finding the space between heartbeats where her body went perfectly still. The communications officer shifted slightly, turning to speak with someone off to his side. For half a second, he stood motionless. Mercer squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, slamming back into her shoulder. The suppressor muffled some of the sound, but at this range, stealth didn't matter. What mattered was the bullet arcing through the night, traveling for 3.4 seconds across nearly 2 miles of freezing air, snow, and wind. She watched through the scope, watched the communications officer's head snap back, watched him collapse, watched the enemy commander freeze, confusion flashing across his face. Then she shifted, found the commander, fired again. The second shot took him in the throat, not instant death, but incapacitation. He went down clutching his neck, blood spraying across the snow. 2 shots, 2 targets, impossible range. The enemy forces froze for 3 critical seconds trying to process what had just happened. Their commander was down, their communications were severed, and they had no idea where the shots came from. Mercer didn't wait. She shifted targets, found a squad leader directing fire toward Bravo's position. Squeezed the trigger. The man dropped. Another squad leader, another shot. She worked methodically, picking off anyone who looked like they were taking command, creating chaos, severing leadership. In the valley, Brennan's voice cut through the confusion. All teams' enemy command structure is disrupted. Push forward. Get to the extraction zone. The SEALs moved immediately, professional training overriding exhaustion and wounds. They didn't know why the enemy had suddenly lost cohesion. They didn't question it. They moved. Mercer fired until her magazine ran empty. Reloaded, fired again. 8 shots, 6 kills, 2 misses, each one buying the SEALs precious seconds. But now the enemy had figured out her position. Mortar rounds began impacting around the cell tower. First one, then 3, then a dozen. The structure shuddered with each impact, concrete cracking, rebar screeching. Mercer grabbed her rifle and rolled away from her position just as a round impacted directly where she'd been lying. The explosion threw her sideways, ears ringing, vision swimming. She tasted blood. Concrete dust filled the air, choking her. Another impact, closer. The tower groaned, beginning to collapse. Mercer ran, not toward safety. There was no safety, just away from immediate death toward probable death. Behind her, the tower fell in a cascade of concrete and twisted metal, but she was already moving through the ruins, disappearing into the darkness. How do you carry the weight of lives you couldn't save? In the valley, the SEALs exploited the chaos. Brennan led them in a fighting withdrawal toward the extraction zone, teams leapfrogging through covering fire. The enemy tried to reorganize, but without centralized command, their assault lost coordination. Small unit leaders attempted to take charge, but none of them had the full picture. None of them knew which positions to reinforce, which to abandon. Medevac helicopters finally lifted from base, exploiting the confusion to risk the approach through heavy weather. The first bird touched down at the marsh edge, rotors screaming, snow whipping in cyclones around the fuselage. Medics rushed out. Foster was loaded first, along with 3 other critical casualties. Cortez climbed in beside him, still holding pressure on his wound even as the helicopter lifted in a violent bank out of the valley. More birds followed. More wounded. More lives pulled back from the edge. Webb coordinated the extraction with professional efficiency despite the tourniquet around his leg and blood loss that made his vision tunnel. Wade counted heads, making sure every operator made it to the birds. The enemy tried to regroup. Sporadic fire came from multiple directions, but the encirclement was broken. Sealed defensive positions held. Brennan orchestrated the withdrawal with textbook precision, teams cycling through the extraction point while maintaining security. It was chaos shaped into order. Disaster narrowly turned into survival. By the time the 5th helicopter lifted, 193 SEALs were out. 7 were not. 7 families would receive visits, folded flags, and words that could never fill the space left behind. But 193 were going home. Wade stood at the final pickup zone, counting heads one last time, his clipboard soaked with blood and snow. "Everyone's out except us, sir." Brennan looked back across the marsh at the blood staining the snow. Blood that would freeze solid and vanish by morning, leaving no trace of how close they'd come to total annihilation. The reports would call it tactical brilliance, adaptive leadership under fire. Brennan knew better. One woman with a rifle had saved them. Any sign of Ghost 7? Hayes cycled through frequencies, listening. "Negative, sir. She went dark after counterfire began." "Did she make it?" "No transmissions, no beacon, nothing." Which meant she'd either escaped clean or she was gone. The last helicopter settled in, rotors never stopping, pilot gesturing urgently for them to board. Brennan climbed on last as protocol demanded, ensuring every operator under his command was out before him. As the bird lifted, he looked back at the valley. At the Christmas Eve battlefield that had almost become a graveyard. Somewhere in those mountains, a woman he'd never met had decided 200 lives were worth risking her own. He hoped she survived, hoped she understood what she'd done, hoped someone somewhere would recognize the impossible shot that changed everything. The helicopter climbed into the storm, lights dark, heading for safety. Brennan pulled out his radio and switched to the long-range reconnaissance frequency. Static greeted him. He keyed the mic anyway. "Ghost 7 if you can hear this. Thank you." No response came. Just wind and static and the roar of rotors carrying them home. It was Christmas morning. Can a single choice destroy everything you've built? Captain Elaine Mercer reached the safe house 40 kilometers north at 0600. Exhausted, frozen, alive. Counterfire had forced her into a 7-hour movement through hostile terrain. She ditched most of her gear, keeping only her rifle and survival essentials. 3 times she evaded patrols. Twice she buried herself in snowdrifts for over an hour while enemy boots passed within meters. But she made it. The safe house was empty. A scheduled dead drop stocked with supplies and communications equipment. She heated water, treated mild frostbite on her fingers, checked her rifle. Everything worked, everything intact except her career. The secure radio activated at 0700. Colonel Novik's voice came through cold and clipped, professional anger, the worst kind. "Ghost 7, you disobeyed a direct order. You compromised a 6-month intelligence operation. You've created an international incident. Care to explain yourself?" Mercer sat in the dark room, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, too exhausted to worry about consequences. 200 SEALs are alive, that's my explanation. That's not how this works. With respect, ma'am, I don't care how it works. I don't care about protocols, operational security, chain of command, any of it. I was in position to help and I helped. Court-martial me if you want. Silence followed. Long enough that Mercer wondered if the connection had dropped. Then Novik's tone softened slightly, just slightly. "The SEAL commander is submitting a commendation, says you saved his entire task force. I don't want a commendation. What do you want?" Mercer glanced at her rifle at the scope that had tracked targets across impossible distances. "I want the names, the 7 SEALs who didn't make it, so I can remember why it mattered." Another pause. "Foster, Daniel, age 23. Wife pregnant, Kellerman, James, age 31, 2 daughters, Martinez. Send me the full list, I'll read it myself." "Understood, Captain. Unofficially, you made the right call. And officially, I have to report this. There will be consequences, I know. Was it worth it?" Mercer thought of Foster asking Cortez about his baby. Thought of Brennan's voice growing more strained by the minute as his people died around him. Thought of Webb joking that they wouldn't make it to Christmas. "Yes, ma'am." It was worth it. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. She was quietly reassigned to a training command. A career-ending move dressed up as a lateral transfer. No court-martial, no public record, no recognition. The intelligence network she'd spent 6 months building was compromised. Assets disappeared. Leads went cold. Years of work evaporated because she took 2 shots. The 7 SEALs who died were honored in a ceremony she wasn't invited to. Their names carved into memorial walls. Families given folded flags and the gratitude of a nation. The 193 who lived went home to families who would never know how close they came to losing them. Brennan kept the brass casing from Mercer's first shot, carried it in his pocket for the rest of his career. A reminder that sometimes rules had to break so people could live. The official report credited superior tactics and coordinated air support. Adaptive leadership in adverse conditions. Textbook execution of extraction protocols. No mention of an impossible shot, no mention of Ghost 7, but in certain circles among operators who had been there that night, her name was spoken quietly, with respect. The woman who took the shot no one else would. 8 years later, a young Marine sniper asked his instructor a question during a training exercise at Quantico. "Gunny, is it true? The story about Christmas Eve." Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Wade, retired SEAL and now teaching marksmanship, set down the rifle he was cleaning. "What story?" "The one about the female sniper who saved 200 operators." Wade paused, remembering snow and desperation and voices disappearing from the radio one by one. "It's not in any official record, but did it happen?" "What's your name?" "Private First Class David Chen, Gunny." Wade went back to cleaning the rifle, hands moving through the familiar motions. Chen, you'll face moments where the rule book has no answer, where doing the right thing means breaking protocol. How do you know what the right thing is? Chen hesitated. You don't, sometimes not even years later. Wade held up a 50 caliber shell casing, worn smooth from years in his pocket. But some people don't need time, they see what has to be done and they do it. Was she one of those people? The best I've ever seen. What happened to her? She made sure others came home. That's all that matters. I heard she never got a medal. Medals are for people who need recognition. Wade stood, meeting the young Marine's eyes. But I'll tell you what she did get. 193 families who still have fathers, sons, brothers, Christmas mornings that wouldn't exist otherwise, and the knowledge that when it mattered she didn't hesitate. That doesn't seem like enough. It never is, but it's what we do. Over time, the story was told again and again. Details shifted. Distances grew longer, conditions harsher, but the core stayed the same. On Christmas Eve, when 200 operators faced death, a woman with a rifle did what no one else could. Brennan, retired now, found her 3 years after that night at a base in California. They talked for hours. He thanked her. She waved it off. That shot was 1 in a million, he said. Then we got lucky. It wasn't luck. No, it wasn't. He asked if she regretted it. The choice, the consequences. She looked at her hands. Hands that had held a rifle steady across nearly 2 miles of freezing air. I think about the 7 we lost every day, but regret saving the others, never. What about the enemy commander? Every day, he was someone's son, I took that away. She met his eyes. But if I had the choice again, I'd take the same shot. That's what haunts me. Not that I did it, but that I would do it again. Now, every Christmas Eve, Brennan watches the snow fall. His grandchildren sleep upstairs. The house is warm. He pulls out the shell casing and holds it up to the light. 200 lives, 1 shot. One woman who decided people mattered more than rules. Somewhere, young operators are learning their trade, memorizing protocols, studying tactics. Some will face impossible choices. Maybe they'll remember the story. The woman who took the shot no one else dared. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because 200 people deserve to come home. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.